everybody. Yeah, thank you for tuning in, spending some of your Sunday afternoon with us. This is Japan here to stay, displacement and community resilience in Japantowns. So I hope that's what you're here for. My name is Nina Wallace. I am the communications coordinator at Densho, also a Yonsei, fourth gen Japanese American living in Seattle on the unceded lands of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people. So I'm going to be moderating today. And yeah, I'm really excited for you all to meet our panelists. They're all brilliant and amazing, and yeah, really excited. And yeah, just before I do that, just a couple things. I would like to just give a shout out to Tadaima and the folks at Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages for hosting. I hope people have been able to watch some of the other really great content they've had throughout this whole pilgrimage. And then also, I think before I kind of pass it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, I want to kind of take a moment to sort of add a little bit of framing to this conversation. We were just kind of talking about this in our little green room before hopping on. But I think, as we get into this conversation, we're going to be talking a lot about displacement of, communities from places and lands that have traditionally been home to them. And I think as we get into that conversation, it's important to acknowledge the original displacement of Indigenous peoples from these lands that we're all on. And so we'll talk about this as we get more into the discussion. But just as we start out, I just kind of want to invite folks to, keep that in mind, that, the history of Japantowns is not just the history of Nikkei people, and, it is part of this bigger, larger, longer history of settler colonialism and white supremacy. And so, just invite folks to kind of keep that in mind. And, if you don't already, learn more about whose lands you're on and kind of what actions you might take in your own life to support Indigenous peoples in regaining sovereignty and ownership and control of their lands. So yeah, with that, I am going to pass it to our panelists so they can tell you a little about themselves. And let's see, maybe Auntie Karen, if you want to start us off and then pass it to somebody else when you're done.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I'm Karen Sakata. In Seattle, third time. Did the sound go away? All of a sudden the sound changed. I'm a third generation Japanese American, born and raised in Seattle. So I've seen a lot of changes. I'm probably the oldest one here on this panel today. So anyway, I've seen changes from the 50s, 60s and onwards. And because I'm third generation, I think, my experience, was we were growing up during the times it was before, before people would even talk about, internment or any of those kinds of things. So it's just, we've seen a lot of change over these past years and a lot of change in the community that we grew up in. So, look forward to having this discussion and seeing how we can make sure we honor our history, honor the history of the people that came before us, and be able to go into the future with honoring that too. So thank you. And next, should I just go down the line? Mario, you want to go?
Hi, thanks, Karen. Thank you, Nina, for that great introduction to what we'll be discussing in this place. Mario Correa, he, him pronouns. I'm in Tongvaland, Los Angeles, part of J-Town Action and Solidarity. Excited to be here, excited to be organizing and speaking with you all. I'll pass it to Erin.
Hey y'all, my name is Erin Kimura. My pronouns are she, they. I'm currently living on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land. I'm a fifth generation Japanese American as well as fifth generation Chinese American. Japanese American by way of Hawaii, and then also Chinese American by way of, well, we've been in Frisco for this long. So yeah. I'm an artist. I'm a facilitator as well as a community member of San Francisco's Japantown. I'm involved with Japantown for Justice, which is a young historically informed, but a historically informed organization that is working toward sovereignty, cultural and economic sovereignty in Japantown in the Fillmore. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you all, and I'll pass it to Zen.
Thank you for having us. I'm Zen Sekizawa. I'm a fourth generation on Tongva land here in Los Angeles. Also part of J-Town Action and Solidarity. My pronouns are she, her. I grew up in Little Tokyo. My grandparents started the Atomic Cafe right after the war. And I like Karen, Auntie Karen says, that I've seen a lot of changes in, the last 4 decades. And it's quite alarming, and I'm happy to know that I'm so happy to be in this space where we can talk together about how Japantowns are going to be able to exist moving forward, with all these things that we're thinking about, like decolonization, gentrification, white supremacy, capitalism, all of these things. But I feel very hopeful in this space that we are going to have a really great conversation today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And yeah, you'll hear more from all of these beautiful, brilliant people later. But I think kind of before as we jump into the conversation, I would like to, kind of contextualize some of the history and kind of what we're seeing today in these neighborhoods. So Erin, when we kind of had a chance to chat before this panel, we sort of bonded over being like Japantown history nerds and just really getting into, all about historical context. And so I wonder if maybe we could start out and if you could tell us a little bit, obviously not all of it, because we could spend like an entire day doing that. What do you think is like the important history and context for us to know as we get into this conversation?
Yeah, thank you so much, Nina. Love history, love memorizing dates and facts. One of my things. Never been the most concise, so we're going to try our very best right now. So essentially, like the Japanese immigration here to the U.S. was it started early, but it started like really in the 1860s, specifically after, Matthew Perry. In Japanese, we call him kurofune, like when you have his black ship came through and just started firing at Japan. And then we opened up Japan. And then the government then was like, oh, okay, we're going to catch up with Europe and the rest of the quote unquote Western world and so forth. So that's when you have a huge wave of immigration. But I also do want to my main expertise, honestly, is in San Francisco, Japantown, and that experience. So I am just going to quickly speak about that. The Japanese settlers the Issei that came to San Francisco went to Chinatown first and foremost. The Chinese were there in the 1840s, and then were on the railroad, and a lot of Japanese couldn't live anywhere else. So were allocated, through segregation, they had to be in Chinatown, right? And then after the 1906 earthquake, but I also want to say they're also in the South Park area of San Francisco as well. They had a lot of hotels. But then when 1906 earthquake popped off, a lot of the Japanese folks moved to what is now called the Fillmore. And during the Fillmore in the late 1800s, early 1900s was a mostly Jewish, Eastern European neighborhood, a lot of Greek folks as well. It was quite bustling. So a lot of the Japanese folks settled here. From the early 1900s up to the eve of World War II, you get a lot of Niseis coming through. A lot of the second generation were being born with the Alien Land Law Act. A lot of the land was then in the hands of the second generation. It was under their name. So then you have businesses. And so it's kind of like, and with redlining, right? So out of segregation comes congregation. So a lot of these businesses and institutions that were set up by the Japanese American folks were for the Japanese American community because they were barred from other spaces. And then with World War II, of course, we have the incarceration, the forced incarceration of the community. So folks were literally, during this time before World War II, Japantown was more or less like 35 blocks of San Francisco. Today, it's about 5 blocks right now. And so folks were removed, forcibly removed, put into camps. And then when they came back from camps, they were given $25. I'm like, okay, go make a new life now. And a lot of them were told not to come back into these big Japanese American spaces, so that not to make waves. So a lot of folks were dispersed, right? So it was really hard for people to come back to San Francisco, Japantown. But those that did, a lot of times maybe the Chinese or their Black or their Jewish neighbors basically kept their houses or the property for them. But most people had to really start all over. Everything was taken, right? And then coming in the 1950s, we have Robert Moses in New York, who was like, let's do redevelopment, urban renewal. And that's where you get the South Bronx Expressway, right? But then we get the rise of hip hop, of course. But then that comes later. But redevelopment was huge during the 1950s. There was this idea of clearing cities of urban blight. In San Francisco, especially, it was like, how can we make more money here and get more tourists? And kind of make sure that all of these neighborhoods of color are now lucrative, right? And I just also want to frame too that similar to what happened in Little Tokyo as well, in Japantown, the Fillmore during World War II became this huge, bustling, vibrant Black community. It was called the Harlem of the West. Incredible talent and folks moving through there. One of the oldest Black bookstores in America, Marcus Books, was started in the Fillmore. And even Maya Angelou talks about that. But basically, you have during post-World War II, it's this very Black and Japanese American space. You do also have a lot of Latinx folks, Filipino Americans, and then also some Chinese folks as well. But then with redevelopment, the city was like, great, J-Town, let's make y'all like Chinatown. So Chinatown after the earthquake, they were kind of forced to Disneyland. What I mean by that is the city was like, great, like, so now that we're going to clear everything away and we're just going to build our own buildings because the earthquake just destroyed y'all. And Chinatown was like, whoa, 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 whoa. We're a tourist industry though. Like we can make it really, like just let us do our thing. So that's when they started using like, the Chinese style architecture, so to speak. And so they kind of employed that strategy, the redevelopment agency in Japantown, trying to literally, Justin Herman basically was trying to make Japantown the Japan of the West. And this was also during the time where they were trying to get Japanese corporations to invest in Japantown. America was also in Japan at this time. They were taking over their military and like really creating those ties. So what you see is basically the leveling and the forced displacement of a lot of Black and Japanese American folks from this community. And this also happened in Manila town as well, down the way where iHotel was. And yeah, then we have redevelopment and a lot of folks were pushed out. What you get today is kind of like the very commercial big malls that are owned by Japanese corporations, but have now switched hands and are in other people's are in a different corporation's hands now. You get a lot of dispersal of folks. Not a lot of the original Japanese American folks who lived in Japantown are there. So yeah, now we are in the age of gentrification, especially in San Francisco, where there are the most billionaires per capita. the highest density. So just want to frame that there. And I know I took some space, but thank you.
Oh, thank you, Erin. That was much needed and appreciated space. I think it really helps us to kind of to understand how we got to this moment that we're in. I want to hope if folks from other cities have anything they want to add in, can feel free to jump in here. If not, I'm going to kind of send our next question to Auntie Karen. And you kind of mentioned this in your introduction a little bit, but you have this really deep, rich history with the neighborhood, not only with your family, but also, kind of as the steward of, this really important, amazing historical spot in Seattle's Japantown or Chinatown International District, the Busch Garden. And so I would love to hear from you just a little bit about, what it was like growing up in this neighborhood and kind of some of the changes that you have seen over the years. I think you're muted, Karen.
Okay, thanks. I really appreciated Erin's perspective, the historical perspective, just to kind of put a layer on things in terms of growing up in Seattle and how similar a lot of the story. Maybe the timeline was a little bit different, but a lot of the things are very, very similar. So when I grew up, in Seattle, the Japantown, what they're calling it Japantown now, but a lot of the community was pretty integrated. There was a section where there were more Japanese businesses, I suppose. There was Japanese restaurants and Tokuda drugstore and Sagamiya's where they had the manju and made things like that, and restaurants and stuff. But the community was pretty close. A lot of the community lived probably within 3 miles of the Chinatown International District. And it spread from downtown International District all the way up to the central area. We're pretty mixed in there with all the Asian Americans, Chinese, Filipino, and the African American community. All the way up from, all the way through the central area and from the international district. But the community, Japanese American community, is a little more close. That was the time when a lot of the Japanese American communities, when they came back, they started businesses. They worked in hotels and apartments. And I grew up in that atmosphere. There were several hotels nearby that my grandmother lived in the hotel, and my father and my uncles ran different hotels within the community too. So I spent a lot of time down there. The nursery school, the Buddhist Church Nursery School, I went to that, which is right up the street on 12th, near 12th and Jackson, or no, I guess that was Rainier and Jackson. But so I spent a lot of time growing up at my grandmother's with my cousins. And, it was really, my family grew up on Queen Anne Hill, which is outside that community, but all our weekends, a lot of our evenings were spent, in community with family, and in the Japantown, Chinatown area. So, in the 60s, as 60s and 70s, a lot of the Japanese Americans, a lot of those folks all kind of moved, as the world changed, people moved outside of the main community, and fewer and fewer of us living actually in Seattle, and most people kind of left. And that's kind of sad for me because, to me, Seattle and the International District is really home. Japantown is really home. Over the years, Busch Garden, Nina mentioned Busch Garden. I worked there when I was, my family went there for all the Mother's Days when we were growing up. When my first job in high school was working there at Busch Garden. It was where a lot of the Japanese American third generation folks all got their first jobs. There was no McDonald's then. There was no, nothing like that. But in the community, working in this huge restaurant all together, we were bus girls, and, parents were the waitresses, and the guys were the dishwashers. And it was just a whole community unto itself. So growing up in that atmosphere was really nice too. The cooks were from Japan. They spoke Japanese, and it was just its own little village by itself. So I worked at Busch all the way through college, and then I went to Japan. When I came back, I became one of the first karaoke hosts at Busch Garden. And, just seeing changes over the years, how the community has changed, who comes to the International District. And one of the things I love about some of the changes is the different communities that have come in and enjoyed and appreciated the history of the businesses. What I see changing now, I think, Aaron, what you mentioned about, corporations and trying to, appeal to tourists. And so in the early 90s, I think we got one of those Chinatown gates, in the area, and they kind of split up and divided the area and rebranded them to, well, this side north of Jackson is Japantown, and south of Jackson is Chinatown, and this 12th in Jackson is Little Saigon. But it's like, that's not the way it was. That's an artificial overlay, and it doesn't really tell the story of our communities. And I'm afraid, I don't want to see that the story go away, because Seattle has such a rich story of people being together, even in the midst of all of that. And to me, that's a real story. We don't, make up a fake Chinatown. We have so much rich history here that we don't need to do that, I don't think. But it's happening. It's kind of happening now. So that's what we're trying to, I think that's what I feel like I'm trying to, make sure that we don't go in that direction, but we can really honor the stories and the history of all who've lived in those spaces. Is that good?
Yeah, no, that is great. Thank you. I think, like kind of hearing the like overview history from Aaron, and then kind of hearing like the personal history from you. And I'm sure, I think everybody here has like very like deep personal connections to these communities. So it's really great to kind of hear what that looks like. I think, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit when you were speaking into Karen about how Japantowns are really important, like not just to Japanese American people, but like to so many people who have come into these neighborhoods and kind of found some form of home there. And I think we all have kind of like talked a little bit about this as we were preparing for this panel. So I think like for this next question, I would love to hear from Mario and Zen. Like Mario, you kind of made a great point in some of our early conversations that, Japantowns have they're important to people because they are kind of these like living historic sites, right? And so I am curious, as we kind of get like sort of shift a little bit from the history to some of the work that you all are doing in Japantowns today. Like, do you see some of that like anti-displacement work and kind of community organizing? Like, if we think of Japantowns as essentially historic sites, right? Like, do you see that work to prevent displacement as kind of a form of historic preservation work? And how do you think that some of this more like grassroots community organizing work you all are doing, like how does that fit into kind of this this history that we've heard a little bit about from Aaron and Karen?
Yeah, I think it fits. It fits right in. It's like you're reading our diary, Aaron, when you're going through the history. It's like, wait, this is basically the same story that, you know, we have here in Little Tokyo, and it sort of lets us know that, yeah, we do want to preserve our stories, but we also don't want to make just some kind of like time capsule, because we know, as was pointed out, our histories are fraught, and we know that a lot of them are incomplete. I didn't grow up in Little Tokyo. I grew up in the Imperial Valley, where the Japanese side of my family were farmers. No one in our family really got our camp story until my grandfather shared it with me a year before he died. And it's one, so I hold that with me, and he ran from internment, and he was harbored by, you know, the migrant workers that worked on the family farm. And that's sort of, that intersection becomes, you know, the story of our family. So when I moved to Los Angeles 20 years ago, to Chinatown, you know, neighboring Japantown, just like many of us, it's like, yeah, this is a place that's very dear to me. It's where I come to not only learn and pass on stories of the history that we do have, but also to discover and be expansive about the stories that we know are incomplete and that have, you know, some erasure, some of which we're responsible for, as, you know, Nikkei, or even like interrogating that term Nikkei. It's like, what? Yeah, and so I think in that way we are preserving, but we're also carrying on a tradition and history in our communities that aren't always told, and that are, you know, that are very, very precious.
Yeah, I completely, I'm still like so blown away by so many of the overlapping like historical like strategies to make Japantowns and then to erase Japantowns, you know? So like it is really, yeah, mind blowing. But yeah, what I think we have to come to an agreement about who we are as a community, or what is a community, you know, like why, like a community is not a tourist trap. Like a community isn't this really surface level or even offensive level of what you think Japanese American culture is, you know, and also like it's Japanese American is different from Japan. Like that's also a big conversation we need to have. And like, yeah, I think that like preserving who we are and parts of the history that we want to, that we're proud of, is definitely something we need to hold on to. And things that like, we can't forget that like we were interned. These communities were because of redlining, because of white supremacy, because of racism. We can't forget those things and how we survived through it as people, you know, with other people, with other marginalized areas, other marginalized people. Like, you know, similar to San Francisco, Little Tokyo during internment was Bronzeville. And Manila town, I believe, as well. Like it was Filipino town. It was, anyways, and we're right by Chinatown as well. And like, yeah, I think these are the things that we need to ask ourselves why this happened. And, you know, like look back in history and see how we all survived these sort of things. Like we also had like Japanese corporations coming in the 80s and then the 90s. And then also, yeah, now they're bought out by giant other corporations. And yeah, it's a real issue. But yeah, we need to remember remember those fights and not forget like what we're fighting for. I think is really important.
I'm also curious, like, we haven't talked about this, but as we're like discovering all the similarities, it's like, are there also, because Little Tokyo seems to me, you know, one of the difficulties is, as much as it's shrunken here, as Aaron pointed out in San Francisco, it's also this sort of like, it's really vulnerable. It's a place that's really vulnerable to that sort of like eminent domain or all of these like policies. When it's time to take something from a community, those communities are looked at first. And in Little Tokyo, we have, I'm curious, like, where are there like police headquarters in other Japantowns? Or is there, you know, Department of Homeland Security like there is here, INS? It's like, it feels like, you know, half the time Little Tokyo is occupied.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, that's another, not to like misdirect or, but yeah, I wonder how much these sort of strategies to establish and keep and now revitalize our communities, like how locked up are these systems?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, that's a great question, Mario. Yeah, I mean, I know in Seattle, like a lot of times, like our kind of international district or like Japantown, kind of the like Asian neighborhood, we get used for a lot of the like photo ops when, you know, the police or the mayor's office want to kind of like prove that, you know, they're not racist because, oh, look, here's like a community of color that, you know, welcomes us. But yeah, so I think that's a great question. And I would actually, yeah, if like Karen or Aaron, you have any thoughts on that, I would love to hear them.
Aaron, you want to go?
Yeah, no, I think this is really great because what we're seeing here is also this larger structures kind of all converging and the ways in which, so for example, here we see, I mean, this is colonialism and this is settler colonialism specifically, and this is like white supremacy, like in action and in the work. And it is also, for example, like all of what we're saying of like having Homeland Security there, like, I mean, that's a way of control in my opinion. But we don't, yes, in Japantown, there is a police station, but it's going to be more toward the Fillmore. And then, so, which is predominantly like the Black neighborhood, the Black Fillmore. And the thing is that, but now we're like separated from this big expressway. So there's that. So it's almost like we are in this like racial triangulation, right? Where it's like the Black Fillmore is on one side. We used to be like one community. I'm not saying everything was harmonious and daisies and rainbows, but I am saying that this used to be a community where it was polycultural in a sense. So meaning we had cultures interacting with one another, creating all these other things. Yeah. And then J-Town is on the side of the Pacific Heights, right? So the other side of Geary, this huge expressway, which is predominantly well off. Pac Heights it's, you know, quite white. And yeah, so yeah, so this is all to say the only other place is just the police station there. But yeah, what about you, Karen? I'm curious. Are there any other institutions?
Well, I don't, you know, that stuff really made me think of the changes that are going down there. I don't think, I mean, we don't have a Homeland Security office or anything like that in the neighborhood. There's more of a pressure to take over the neighborhood because it's right next to the main hub of transportation, and everybody wants to kind of take over the property. Back in the 60s, they built a large stadium for football, and it kind of really tried to encroach into the Chinatown International District and kind of take over. So whenever there's a big game, you know, the rest of the community, you know, gets impacted, you know, they're trying to encroach and take back the property, take back the land. There's pressure for that. And it's a lot of pressure from corporations, I believe, that, we have in Japantown, there was a 17-story, $1 million condo place that was stood up, and we're trying to push back on trying to keep it for people who live in the community, that the developments, we're not against development, but it's not there for rich people to come in, buy up the property and build those $1 million condos and take over the neighborhood. You know, the idea that is our historic home, and it has, there's stories to tell, and it's really important to, you know, it goes back to that question of what is community. It's not just marketing and whoever can buy the highest, most expensive, you know, afford it, that it really has always been a community, and we want to maintain that sense of community, a place where you can go in. And you know, what you said about the different communities, you know, it sounds really familiar when you're talking about Fillmore, and where Japantown and the, you know, African American community overlapped and stuff. And that kind of takes me to, I think Los Angeles had a similar place, like a Cairo, that was Cairo for our Japanese American elders. And this past, has it been 2 years now? 2 years ago, they closed it. They closed it because of financial issues, and it originally got sold to a developer, and then there was community protest, pushback, and they're willing to sell it back to the community. There's a community land trust, Africatown Community Land Trust, that's, you know, taking it back, and they're trying to make it a facility to serve homeless folks. But there's a lot of pressure in the neighborhood to, you know, we're trying to own it together and create a space for community again. And the pressures are really, I don't know, it makes me think back to, you know, during war times, when the No Boys, and then there are people that the 442 and the split that it brought into the community of, do we become part of the mainstream and show them that we can fit, or do we stand up for the rights, under the rights of being Americans, and stand up for that? And I feel like some of those tensions are still, you know, do we stand up for other marginalized communities so that doesn't happen to anybody else? Or do we fit into the mainstream, be some of the developers that come in and show that we're just as successful as the other, you know, gentrifiers and everybody else? I feel like we have this tension going on, you know, it's a very strong one that's going on in our community. So I definitely hear, see, and feel that it resonates a lot with what's going on in your communities as well.
Yeah, I think we kind of keep coming back to this, like, surprised, not surprised. A lot of familiarities in this. I mean, and hearing you kind of talk about, you know, some of these, like, tensions, right? And like, Zen, to your point of, like, what is a community? It's like, well, you know, a community doesn't always agree all of the time, you know. And I think a lot of times, like, you know, as we're kind of looking at some of these changes happening in Japantown communities, right? I think, like, on sort of this, like, broader community level, like, we can all agree that, like, yes, there is a problem, and, you know, these neighborhoods are definitely under threat. But I think sometimes where some of, like, the tensions and, you know, some, like, kind of fractures come in is, like, well, how do we address this, right? Like, what is the solution going forward? And I think, like, something that, you know, we kind of talked about as we were preparing for this panel, and I think something that, you know, is probably occupying, like, a lot of people's brain space who are here today. You know, like, we're in the middle of a pandemic, which has a lot of challenges. But I think, you know, specifically for, like, Asian American communities, right? Like, we've seen this big surge in anti-Asian violence connected to that. And, you know, there have been some really important discussions that have come out around that, like, how do we respond to that? You know, how do we, like, stop Asian hate? You know, but I think that some of what we have seen in response to that is, there are kind of some segments of our communities that are calling for like, okay, well, we need more policing, we need more surveillance to prevent this kind of violence. And I think, connected to gentrification and displacement, right? Like a lot of that kind of public safety conversation ties in because it's a lot of times that same justification, right? Well, to keep our elders safe, to keep, the people in these neighborhoods safe, we need more development. We need more money flowing in. If we can, kind of make it, if we can revitalize the neighborhood, then that will keep us safer. And so, I'm curious, and, this question can be for anyone who feels compelled to go first. But yeah, I'm curious how you all see, gentrification and displacement as forms of anti-Asian violence, and looking at it from that lens. Like, does that help us better address kind of the root causes of this, and like how does that help us actually keep our communities safe?
Yeah, I think the acknowledgement, like going back to like what a community does for people, right? It provides a safety net. Like if you know your neighbors, if you know the shop owners, if you spend time in an area and you see something happen to someone you're not gonna just watch it. I think, that is part of like what we're seeing right now is like as our communities are being stripped away from any sort of resemblance of human interaction, then we don't care. People don't care about their neighbors at this point. And I'm talking about also unhoused neighbors, and I'm talking about, everybody, specifically like in Little Tokyo. And I think that this sort of acknowledgement of like how like systemic this situation is, and like the discussion about like trying to get people to understand they're advocating for their own erasure, you might be safe, or quote unquote you might be safe, but you're causing violence against a bunch of other people for this small time period. But this is not going to last long for you or anybody else. It is just filtering in to uphold this tourist trap, this white supremacy sort of like notion of, what this a Japantown is, and it is like this Disneylandification of things, and I really think, it is violence. Gentrification is total violence. Like displacement is violence. And having that conversation within the community and making some folks understand is kind of where we're at. I feel like it seems like we're all kind of at there right now, but then some people don't care, and I think that's the heartbreaking part. Oh, this person in my community doesn't care, or like is okay with being complacent in their position in this struggle. And like, I think that's the heartbreaking part. But then it's just like, then what do you do with that information? Do you just call them out for accountability? It's like difficult. I think Aaron was talking about this with San Francisco and the hotel. Like, it's this hard part to navigate. I like kind of think about like, I don't have it, but I had a lot of friends having to talk to their parents about Trump and white supremacy and couldn't get through it. And it's just like, what do you do with that information? And it's just similar to, people in our community who might not care about Black people, about Indigenous people, about, gentrification, They just they're just capitalists. And what do you do with that information?
Well, it's like a part of like only seeing one solution. So I don't know, when we talk about public safety, and especially all the sort of videos we were seeing about elders being attacked, and it's like, how is revitalization gonna help these people when the reason they're so exposed and vulnerable is development, is gentrification? Like, Little Tokyo is shops and elderly people and SROs still. We also have a Cato where our seniors were being evicted. Seniors were being transferred into another Pacifica, that's a developer-owned like building where, you know, they for some reason went out and got qualified to accept COVID patients. So they were mixing COVID patients in with our seniors, and there were, I think, 120 deaths as a result of that. And when we look to our community that only has this one vision of development to help speak out, like, they're not there because they're part of the problem. They're not speaking out because they're in bed with all of these developers and can't. And that sort of speaks to, you know, no, we won't be better developers on our own. We will make these same sort of structures. Yeah, I think some of our work has to do with the kind of restoring of an ecosystem in a way, as like Zen pointed out. It's like, if we have a more diversified community where there are working class people who, you know, who are there with their seniors, and it's like people can look out for each other in this sort of like, you know, way that many people point to when, you know, when there was more, especially like class diversity, working class people, low income people in our communities. And so, yeah, so upsetting that balance leaves people more vulnerable. And, you know, all of this stuff, it brings more policing. Here we have business improvement districts, we have, you know, the police, and all of these other, we have like tech corporations now that are being charged with like care for the unhoused, charged with these sort of like, it's like all of this, yeah, it's all of this like trying to fix this sort of problem with the same tools rather than seeing that we need to change the system.
Does San Francisco and Seattle have business improvement districts as well, or the BID or anything like that?
I know for San Francisco, we have the community benefits district, which is really looking to the business and the economic vitality of the community. And then we also are now a cultural district, which is for the cultural preservation of the community as well. I think both the cultural district is definitely a California-wide one, I think. And then the benefits district, I think, is through the city. But yeah, certain hotel taxes help with the cultural district. Karen, what about Seattle?
Oh, you're muted, Karen.
Okay, sorry about that. In the international district, we have what is, you know, it's just for the city, the International Special Review Board that kind of supposed to protect the cultural and historic pieces of it, but it's a tricky thing to work within a city structure that's this, you know, but it's still a sub part of all the developed, you know, different development pieces that are going on. So we have something like that. We, you know, there's part of the district is considered a historic district, nationally recognized, and some sections are not, but they're still very much a part of that same neighborhood. So not really protected. I mean, the city council recently gave developers, you know, approval to, you know, go up as high as 17 stories next to all the other buildings that are only 3 and 4 stories. to tower over and just, and then all market rate housing again, which is, and they only wanted to build like 400 and 500 square foot units. So who is that going to attract? Who are they building for? So, we don't have as many protections as I feel like we would like, in order to make sure that it stays a community and not just an investment for short timers who don't have that investment. The idea of separating out and saying this is Japantown, this is Chinatown, this is Little Saigon, but what happened to all the other people that lived in those neighborhoods that are not recognized? And Seattle was so much, different in some ways than some other cities where it didn't really develop out like that in that strict relationship. We had hotels what would be considered the Chinatown side of the international district. A lot of people did. A lot of Japanese Americans ran hotels in that neighborhood. So it's not like, in a lot of Filipino people lived in that same neighborhood. So I kind of, in the 60s, in 60s and early 70s, we called it the international district for a reason, because to recognize all the different people from different backgrounds that were living in the neighborhood. And now there's this push to separate and segregate and act as if we weren't, that we weren't part of the same, being impacted by some of the same rules, and when there's a question, somebody asked a question about, I don't want to be just something that we see in museums or see a plaque on the wall. The stories of our different communities, our different heritage, and how we carry that forward into the future, and appreciate all the other cultures that have been through that same process. That I think we should, to me, that's a direction we need to go in, and not continue this, fake Disneyland kind of thing, of pretend like, oh, this was that town, and we'll go look at that and see the, Japanese or Chinese or whatever things happen, but make it a real space where people come together and share. And I don't know, that's what I'd like to see. I also think a lot of Asian Americans, when they're, back in the 60s, the model minority and all that stuff, and, people wanted to separate themselves, or we're, like the internalized racism or whatever, or, the hierarchical, which who's better than who in terms of the hierarchy of that, where some people fell into seeing themselves as better than somebody else, and so you have to maintain that. But I think that's really a dangerous way, and we have to really respect what everybody has been through, and kind of really, we have to work together to help pull everybody up. There's not much middle class left, but as people of color and communities of color, to really raise up, what the idea of community is, to support each other, is what I think we have. To me, I think that's the only way we can go forward. We might not, see it in one particular section of a city, but that all generations can, access where they come from, who they are, their history, and what that brought to their life, and what they bring forward is something that I would love. I really strongly believe that everybody needs to know that stuff. You can take it wherever you want to take it, but if you're not grounded in those things and that awareness, then I don't know. I think you can get blow in the wind with whatever is coming down the pipe. So, ramble. Sorry about that.
No, I loved it so much. I just wanted to add really quickly. I want this panel could be 10 hours long. Like, I want to say so many things, but I want to say the business improvement district is a bad thing for us here in Los Angeles. It is private security by, and it is an arm, it is security for gentrifiers, and it is an arm of the police. And it's something that we deal with in Chinatown, we deal with in Little Tokyo, we deal with all over Los Angeles at this point where there is gentrification, and it is just to harass the unhoused folks. It is just, it's a bad thing. I just wanted to make that clear. And I was wondering, I didn't realize it wasn't all of California, or if it was very specific to Los Angeles.
Well, in Seattle, we have what we call it the Business Improvement Association in the International District. And because they're only, what's unfortunate is because they're only looking out for the businesses, that they're not looking at the community as a whole, which really then, skews any kind of supports or decisions, one way versus another. And I think when you look at the unhoused folks as less than human beings that you need to be swept away and hidden, sweep them under the carpet so we don't see them, so our businesses can be, it's just, so wrong. I think growing up in a lot of the hotel businesses that we all had, and a lot of them served, what back in the day was called Skid Row, and lower income, single men that were out in the community, but still, people are part of our community. And I really have seen over time that change in a really negative way, where people are, I don't know, that they're not treated as human beings, and people get afraid of folks. Nobody's, they're, not reaching out and treating somebody like a human being that needs some of the same things we all need. I think we're just, that's not helping us at all. And I think until we can come to some point where we can, find a space, that we can interact and bring people into community with, on a daily basis, whoever we pass by, that I think, this is not a good direction if we're going to segregate out or treat people like don't belong. They're in the neighborhood, they belong, they're there for a reason, and we need to, interact as human beings.
Yeah, I think so. We're kind of coming up on that hour, and I think as Zen said, this could go for a long time. So I think if folks are willing to stick with us, we might go a little over. But yeah, I want to kind of get into some of these questions from the audience that are coming in, and I think Karen, you kind of touched on this in what you were just saying, but we kind of open it up to everyone else too. We have a question from Jen, who asks, how do we serve and preserve the J-Town community while protecting and providing for the most marginalized members like houseless people?
I feel like Japantown Action, I feel like y'all will probably have a lot here too. But I also do want to note, again, what Zen was saying about like, what is the community? Who is J-Town, right? Who is J-Town? What is J-Town? A lot of folks who represent Japantown, who are working in the community-based organizations in Japantown, don't necessarily live in Japantown, right? Is it this suspended concept? Because a lot of folks are dispersed, and there's a lot of Korean, Latinx, Spanish-speaking folks, and there's a lot of Chinese folks, and a lot of houseless peoples as well. San Francisco, especially right now, in every major city, but specifically is dealing with a houselessness crisis. And honestly, homes are a human right. Shelter and having the choice to have a safe place to live is a human right. That is baseline. So how do we serve and preserve the J-Town community while providing? I don't think that these things need to be considered separate or in any way distinct. I think this is, again, like what Mario's saying, how can we come up with a more this is a time of like imagination and like, we've come this far, the earth is on fire, y'all, the dinosaurs might roll through. how can we imagine beyond this scarcity mindset, right? How can we use our imaginations beyond binaries, beyond the boxes that are given to us, turn hegemony on its head? How can we think holistically, right? How can we understand that everyone, like Karen and everyone saying, that's our community too? How do we also address, Jen, I know you also asked about anti-Blackness as well. How does that play a part in the community? And how does us also grappling with our anti-Blackness and the fact that we are also settlers. This is not our land, that we are settlers here in this quote unquote Japantown. How do we address that? And how do we say, oh no, houseless people, you're not supposed to be here. So how can we navigate these spaces and again, change the framework by which we're even understanding and looking at ourselves as community members? And I understand there's like, elephant in the room, y'all. You already know San Francisco J-Town's doing the Buchanan Hotel thing. Hate to always bring it over there. We're going to make it quick. But yeah, with the Buchanan Hotel situation, it's like, yes, I understand the city is going about it in a very trash manner of not opening generational wounds. However, houselessness is a crisis. And 50% of the folks that are houseless are Black. A large proportion, a third, I believe, are LGBTQ youth who have been in the foster care system or have been in the welfare system. So just think about that. And so, yeah, how do we serve and preserve the J-Town community? These can all happen together in tangent. We need everyone involved. We can't it's not just these quote unquote few people that get to decide. How can we incorporate everyone? Diversity of thought brings innovation, and we know that. So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Aaron. I agree with all of that sort of laying out of what's happening. There is part of our community that is anti-Black. We know that. And it's time to just really be honest about it. One of our sort of imperatives with J-Town Action and Solidarity is that we are giving solidarity and we are sort of modeling Asian Black solidarity as well as we can with our work, not only serving unhoused folks, but organizing with them so that they have a more equal voice in our community. And as non-Black people of color, right? It's like we owe so much to we benefit from all of the advances in when it comes to what a lot of people are calling critical race theory now. But all of that, such a large majority of that comes from Black knowledge, from Black scholarship, from Black activism. And so to really, if we want to really address and come at these things in a more holistic way, we have to sort of acknowledge we're not making this stuff up. We're talking mutual aid. We're talking all of these things that, not only come from Indigenous and Black ways of looking at the sort of layout of what this country is and their contributions to fighting that. We have some of that of our own as well, and we don't have to look that far back. There was a time when, after camp, everybody was there. We had an unhoused problem among Japanese American people. We had drug usage problems. We had, things that we had to develop systems of mutual aid for. So this is something, we're not starting from scratch from. We do have ways to plug in and take the conversation forward.
Yeah, I totally just want to add a little bit onto what Mario is saying. I completely agree with Aaron and Mario about so many things. And I think, Jen, that is our legacy. That is our legacy and our cultural, history is rooted in activism and radical thought just to survive. And I think that what Mario says, how we were after camp, how, Japanese Americans were part of, the civil rights struggle, all of that, those sort of things. That's something, with helping the unhoused folks, being in solidarity with Black people, that is preserving a part of our cultural history. So like, I agree with Erin, like, it's the same thing. Like, that's something I'm very proud of, all these aunties and uncles down here that are still in our community, still fighting, still struggling, that, they're in the history books and they're still alive and we see them outside. Like, that's so cool. And then like, that is something that like, that's what Little Tokyo is for me, and like thinking about like my family and like how that was a place of anything goes and working class people, like no discrimination. Like, it was really the underbelly of the community, if you really want to talk about it, but that was the community, and those are the things that we want to be proud of, to be a people who are inclusive and help each other and fight against, oppression and like, so it is the same thing. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. I'm continually blown away by just all the like depth of thought in this group. So I'm very grateful to all of you for sharing. I think we maybe have time for like a couple more questions. But if folks do have other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I think another question coming in from Thomas Kurihara is ethnic enclaves survive through growth with increased residential property and businesses to support. Japantowns don't reflect that combination. So Thomas asks, why is this, and can it be reversed to preserve the past?
So I'm also, my family, they were business owners in Japantown, but also in Chinatown. And I do think businesses, I hear you on business support. Okay, sorry, I just this guy. So the increase. Okay. I'm not sure why they don't survive with this combination. I guess maybe I want a little bit more information about this question, Thomas, but I hear you and I appreciate the comments. But I think business support, something that we also need to think about too is like, who are these businesses serving, right? And at least for in San Francisco's Japantown, like this is now considered, like we've been very dependent on tourism as a thing, since we have these huge malls, you can't see any of the shops. They're all in this big cave with no windows. You feel me? So we have that. And then residential property. Yeah, we just don't got that. We have a lot of supportive housing for seniors, especially, but I think we also need to think about the way that the city and like city governments intervene as well. And I think especially with this legacy that is redevelopment too, right? And the ways that they have kind of pitted the J-towns to be this tourist place, to also be like this visitor place where people who are trying to work in the community and serve the community don't live there anymore, right? So I don't see that. That's why too, is like looking at the city and like the long fetch of history always, and the way that all of these different structures have converged to what we have today. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, it took me a hot second.
Thank you, Erin. I think maybe I'm going to ask one more question from Daniele, who says, since neighborhoods like Boyle Heights and Crenshaw were also historically Japanese, how can we link struggles with groups fighting gentrification in those neighborhoods? So maybe we'll start with Zen and Mario, since I think this is a LA question, but also parallels to Seattle and San Francisco, if Erin and Karen have thoughts as well.
Boyle Heights and Crenshaw were, black and brown and Asian Japanese communities. Mario and I both started our anti-gentrification work in Boyle Heights. So we definitely have a soft spot for that and support whenever we can. I think I think that's something we need to do immediately. Like, we need to come together, like we are here between the Japantowns, but then it is a bigger struggle or bigger conversation about just gentrification in general. It can go from gentrification in Los Angeles, gentrification in San Francisco. Like, we have to come together and realize, like, the one common enemy. And it's clear. It's these capitalists, these white supremacists who are here to exploit you, and I think that, like, when we can come together and realize that we do have the power, because we are more than they are, and, like, we have to it's so easy to get beaten down, to think you have no power because of these couple people who have money. But money isn't the power, it is standing up and acknowledging and spitting about it. Like Mo in our group says, you just gotta spit. You gotta spit and you gotta fight at the very least. And I think that's really what it comes down to. Very not Japanese, right? But we gotta do it. Yeah, that's my thought. Mari, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, we do need to link these struggles here in LA. Boyle Heights, we're talking about too, for people not from the area. Little Tokyo, Chinatown, Boyle Heights, Arts District, which used to be Little Tokyo, but now a separate sort of place. It's like, that's the triangle there. And for sure, there's so much, like Aaron, I think earlier was saying, we were sort of scattered and not encouraged to centralize back. And so, yeah, we did in LA. And then also, post, some of us were being more accepted into the dominant culture. We moved out from our enclaves too, even to make, like, kind of different, separate enclaves in Gardena or, what's the Torrance, Crenshaw. Yeah, I don't know. We need to link these struggles with other communities. I'm very encouraged by us linking these sort of J-Town struggles with each other. Yeah, that's the key. We need to all link up.
Yeah, in Seattle, I'm thinking of the Cairo situation and what's going on right now in terms of how, the African American community and the Japanese American community can we can support the process. I mean, they want their goal. Their plan is to set up the space, the former Cairo nursing home space, to be used for homeless shelter for African American, not just African American, but there, we know that the population of home unhoused folks are higher percentage African American than they higher than the rate in the population itself. So, but where Cairo is situated is right across this, it's across the street from the Buddhist church. There's a old dojo. There's a kind of retirement space. At the Midori, there's a couple of housing for 2 retirement homes within 3 blocks of this same space. And there was just a first meeting of having community come together to talk about, their concerns or how we could make it a successful place. That there's been so much money and so many dollars and people put into addressing homelessness in Seattle, but it hasn't been successful. And so here a community organization is coming, and we to work together to make it something that will really thrive and have better systems. And anything that's been developed in Seattle is one way to come together. So I'm hopeful about what can come of that, but there's so much further to go. And it's not just white developers. I mean, they come in all colors, with money. And that one building was people from it was a Taiwanese international company that was coming in. There are other large corporation with money that, you know, gentrifying the international district. So there might be Asian businesses, but they're chains from other places that are not local. They're not. So it's, you know, when you say Asian, maybe it's Chinatown is Asian, then it might be Asian, but it's still international corporation money. And how can we make sure it stays, we don't stereotype ourselves into that Disneyland world. Let's see.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I do want to be mindful of time, and I want to make sure Kimiko, who's behind the scenes, making sure all of this magic happens, gets a chance to eat lunch. So I think maybe if we can kind of close out and, maybe just like very quickly, if we can kind of go around, and I would love to hear, because I feel like, we've talked a lot about some like heavy stuff and about like the struggles that you all are facing. And, I think organizing can be very like spirit draining sometimes. But I would love to end on a note and just hear like in a few words, like what is giving you hope in this work? Or what kind of future do you want to see for Japantowns is another way to put it.
Okay, shall I go?
Yes,
All right.
please take it away, Erin.
This is what I used to do in first grade, y'all. Always here. Start off. I just want to note a lot of like this. I just have a lot of gratitude to be in this space. So thank you, Kimiko, who's behind the scenes. Nina, thank you for being here. Also, Mia Sommers, who's connected me to you, Nina. Zen, Mario, Karen, thank you all for being here and sharing space. Again, all these little things are happening, we're all these little dots, we're all these little constellations, and we can all connect, and we have this huge, beautiful network that's here. It's just having these moments to connect and realizing, oh my gosh, we have this really tight network of change makers and like folks who are really trying to expand and think really holistically about how we can move forward. I just want to note gratitude, but also like we got, y'all. We are all we got. That is what it is. I'm excited to knowing that we are all future ancestors and understanding it's a long game, right? Mm-hmm. We want to do this for the babies. You know what I mean? So how can we make something that's long-term sustainable? And I also just want to remember a lot of Black feminists at the Komagi River Conference were like, yo, we want to make sure that everyone's free. And that was including us. So we also need to respect that is the legacy that we're on their shoulders as well. And we need to remember that and remember the Black struggle, but also the Indigenous folks as well. And so understanding that this is going to be a very intersectional, but also a very like, we need everyone. And we also need to remember that we are a part of a larger community with other folks too. So yeah, would love to see us expand in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Anybody else?
I'll just say something next. Having this opportunity to speak across, different communities is really, I feel it's really inspiring, and it kind of gives hope to the sense that, I look at you guys, you're all young people, out there, really, with the voice of, and the message that, the things that we're trying to work towards. So to me, that's a hopeful all by itself. But that organizing together, kind of that big picture vision that I think would fit in any of our communities. Our stories are similar enough that, the strategies that we want to go forward with, and it's just time. It's time to acknowledge the richness of all the different communities and voices and cultures that live in this United States, and how we can all move together to kind of take it the next level of really appreciating where everybody comes from and all that they have brought to make our space, make our world as rich in so many ways, that if we can move towards that appreciation of all who's gone before and how we can move forward together, that's, just being part of this is, giving me hope for thinking like that. So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you all for all the work that you do.
Yeah.
I don't want to go last.
Okay, go first.
Yeah, I'm also super hopeful with as sort of this work progresses, and finding new people to connect with. Yeah, I think that's really how we need to move forward, rather than in our isolated little pockets. We need to network. We need to, there's more of us. There's more of us, and we just need to start doing it. Like Erin says, we're all we have. Like, we are the people in our community that are going to make our community better. It's not abstract. It's us. All right. So.
Thanks. I guess I'll go last. I mean, I want to just echo everybody was saying, like, just being in this space is really, it defines who we are as a community, honestly. Like, this is what a community looks like. Like, this is a community that is fighting for the same thing, and so this is really special. Yeah, I think, I don't know, my head is so full from all of this conversation. Like, I am very hopeful. We are better in numbers and together, and we have to share this information with each other, because the stuff is cloaked in so many insidious ways, and I think uncovering these things is a difficult task, and then trying to explain it to people is another difficult task, and I think we have to like this like having this conversation makes me feel like we're not so alone in, like, discovering, like, all these wild, terrible, awful things that are happening. I know we're trying to end on a happy note.
It's okay. We can be real.
But yeah, I am hopeful. Like, going back to, like, what a community is like, I want people to come to these areas and experience what we are, all the facets of we are, rather than having to go into a museum to look at it. And that's, you go into a museum because it's erased. You need to preserve it. You need to experience it. And that's what this community, that's what going into an area should feel like and be like. You can submerge yourself into the food and the culture and the music and this and that and everything, and see, the history of Bronzeville and everything, all that stuff. Not just go into this white box institution and that's what you want, that's how you want to, that's not how I want future generations to understand where we're coming from. So, like, yes, this makes me very hopeful. I'm so happy to connect, and thank you everyone for, showing up and putting it together. Nina, thanks. That's it.
Yeah, thank you so much again to all of our panelists, all the amazing Tadaima people behind the scenes. And yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in, and hope to continue this conversation online, offline. So yeah, thank you everyone. And yeah, please enjoy the rest of your Sunday.